We go ahead and get started. In the words of, this is true, a leading presidential candidate, this panel is classy and it's huge, so we're going to get going right away. What we heard in the first panel, I think fairly definitively, and what you could see with a quick stroll through the showcase out there, which I hope everyone will do, is that these technologies, these advanced nuclear technologies, are real. And we heard that they should be ready very, very soon. The question then is anyone going to pay for them? Is there money behind this? And we heard Rachel Slaybaugh say that she's got all these excited young students who are ready to go out and save the world. And what they really need, they have the know-how, they have the technology. What they need is some help on the regulatory side, to be sure, but they also need money. And I thought we would start with somebody who was one of those excited young students ready to change the world not long ago. Leslie Dewan, who is the CEO and co-founder of Transatomic. Leslie, can you tell briefly the story of how you went from being one of those students to now running one of these companies, and how you went about attracting some initial capital to get going?
Thank you so much, Matt. Absolutely. So my co-founder, Mark Massey, and I, we started Transatomic when we were midway through our PhDs in nuclear at MIT. And we, even before we started thinking about incorporating a company, we had been reading very broadly about the advanced reactor technologies that were out there, the whole suite of Generation 4 designs that had immense benefits on the fronts of safety and waste reduction and cost and anti-proliferation as well. And in the course of that, reading and discussions that we had, we became particularly focused on molten salt reactor technologies. We liked their safety benefits, and we were able to figure out a version of a molten salt reactor design that can directly consume spent nuclear fuel, so it's able to address the waste issue in a head-on fashion. And we thought, well, why don't we do this as a startup instead of going along more traditional routes? Why don't we find a way to attract private capital directly into this? And we were actually inspired in large part by TerraPower. We thought, well, that's an existence proof for the fact that you can commercialize an advanced reactor with large amounts of private funding. So that was one of the main pieces that gave us the impetus to go forward. We were really lucky in that we have a really tremendous group of investors in Transatomic. So Art Sandberg and Ray Rothrock on these panels, also Peter Thiel's Founders Fund as well. And I think, primarily, they're investing in us because we will make them lots and lots of money in the future. But I think we're also... we think. What's also great about them, though, is that they're very in line with our broader mission, the fact that we want to produce large, scalable amounts of carbon-free electricity. We want to move the world away from fossil fuels and towards better carbon-free sources like nuclear power.
Thanks, Leslie. As you mentioned, Art Sandberg, who is a managing partner of Hawks Financial Service, is one of your principal investors. Art, I assume you're not in this as a charitable investment. Tell us what you think from a.
Well, I'm down in Washington, which is the antithesis of what I do. Somebody once said, make filthy amounts of money. Maybe it was you, Leslie. I'm all about that, and I'm proud of it. So this is a family office. I had a hedge fund that was once the largest in the world. It was all about innovation. Both public and private equity. It's a different world. You have to deliver. Right now, if you don't deliver in a quarter or two, or a year or 2 years, you're out of business. So imagine yourself trying to invest in this industry from what you've heard up until now. Peter Thiel is an investor with Ray and myself in Leslie's company. He's written a book, Fast to Fail. Think about Fast to Fail and everything you've heard so far. This is slow to die. And you've got to be a little bit insane. And I am very proud that I'm going to turn 75 next week, that I'm still insane, because this is an insane world. And unless insane people do insane things, nothing's going to change. So this has been a great panel. But let's get real. I mean, how do you take money that is entrusted to you either by your clients or your family and support something this complex with this many political agendas? It's like nuts. So, but I believe in this. So, so I did it. And Leslie's is the two that I'm involved with, which is Leslie's and I chair Tri-Alpha, which some of you have probably heard of, are two different examples of the same thing. I'm sorry if I'm going on too long.
No, please.
But Leslie's is about taking a technology that's been around and doing engineering work to prove out that it can scale, which is very attractive because there are milestones, which is really why Peter Thiel's in it. There are milestones. You meet the milestones, you get more money. You don't, you're dead. And Leslie knows that. Transatomic is exactly.
She does now.
She does. She does. So help her, please. Tri-Alpha is the complete opposite. It's trying to do fusion in a completely different way. I got involved in 2001. We made a major milestone, which you'd think would be just exciting the world, and it is, the science world. Science world doesn't generate a lot of money. And the whole idea, and the reason I got involved with Tri-Alpha when I first heard about it is they didn't try and do an experiment that would prove what a national lab would do. They said, how do we produce fusion power that is aneutronic, no radiation, that is completely safe, and that can be commercially scalable once we've spent the money? If I had known that it would be 15 years later and we still don't have all the answers, I'm not sure I would have done it. But then again, I think I would have because the people are extraordinary. So we fit into that category of, we hope, we will have a plant within 10 years, and we are in that 2030 to 2050 scale up if we meet one more science milestone. So you have to have a clear investment reason to back this kind of stuff, and you have to be somebody who is interested in some of the social factors that have been mentioned, because if you're not, and I raised a lot of the money for these companies, you're not going to have any luck. You're not going to go to a venture capital fund in California that can invest in an app that is going to go ballistically viral and get a return on investment in 3 years. You know, you're not going to compete with those guys. And in fact, with the exception of Ray and one other very great guy, we haven't really attracted much money from that community. So.
Chris Colbert, you're the Chief Strategy Officer of NuScale. That technology started somewhat differently. It was a university project also, but it was funded by the government. Talk about your story and how you got from that to where you are today, which is much closer to deployment than a lot of the other more experimental things going on.
Thanks. So, as you mentioned, NuScale started off really at a project funded by the DOE back in 2000. And if you think about the question of fast or fail or slow and die or whatever it was that Art said earlier, our company co-founder, Jose Reyes, was 45 years old when he started this. When our first reactor goes operational in 2025, he'll be 70. So key advice is start young. So I'm glad to see a lot of young people here, because you won't be able to make it. And maybe it's not slow and die, but slow and steady and patient is really what you need to be. But from NuScale's perspective, you know, it was really a long time of doing very conceptual science-type stuff. Spend-wise, from 2000 to 2011, the company invested about $25 million. From 2011 to the point we get through our design certification, we'll have almost $1 billion into it. So in terms of getting over that hurdle, the question isn't really one of being able to go fast, it's whether you can raise the money to go at the speed you need to go. So when people were mentioning earlier about the hurdles to getting through it, you know, in our 25-year schedule, of that time frame, about 4 years is construction and 4 years is licensing. 17 years was engineering and research, and that's just principally a function of the dollars being spent on it. So, you know, been very fortunate in our situation that since 2011, Fluor has come in and invested over $270 million. The U.S. Department of Energy has invested $100 million into it. And in that pace, we're in a way to be there in 2025. But that experience really is one of, you know, I agree with fast or fail, but getting the money to spend that fast is really the challenge for private capital.
Maria, I think it was you on the first panel that mentioned that there may be kind of 3 phases of nuclear technology. We're in phase 1, obviously, with the generation 3 reactors that we have now and building more of them. Phase 2 probably will be light water SMRs of the type NuScale is building, and then we hope phase 3 is the things that Leslie and others are doing. From the perspective of the industry, how do you see SMRs fitting in and NuScale's relative success moving forward?
Yeah, great, thanks. And we don't see those as distinct phases, but overlapping phases, I think we said on the last panel. So we should look at that as sort of a continuum of innovation. But we really see a key step in this transition to advanced nuclear is the SMR and the small modular reactor technology. And so, in fact, we'll be announcing today a consortium called SMR START, or Smart Start. And it's really an organization that's pulling together the designers, interested energy companies, really in one force, if you will, to demonstrate to the public, to the regulator, that we're serious about bringing these designs to market. So we'll be holding a press event later today with Dan Lippman, our Vice President for Supplier and International Programs, and we'll be hosting that teleconference to launch this Smart Start organization today.
So, Tina Taylor, let me turn to you. You're with EPRI, which is the Electric Power Research Institute, the Director of Nuclear External Affairs. Talk about the interplay between private and public money. We've heard a little bit about private money, a little bit about public. How do they come together in financing these kinds of reactors?
Yeah, that convergence is really producing an awesome time to be part of the nuclear industry right now. The private capital we've heard about this morning is an impressive amount right now being spent on a number of technologies. I think that's doing a couple of things for us that we couldn't do with public funding alone. One, it's allowing the germination of a lot of ideas simultaneously. People can be developing and explaining the benefits of different technologies. And it has clearly introduced a sense of urgency, set a pace that the nuclear industry is not used to, really. And, we're putting out some aggressive timeline goals for us to all meet. Now, public funding is very important as well, right? A lot of the technologies are coming out of prior public funding. The public funding can be applied to produce some foundational R&D that can be used by all, make available national capacities to be shared amongst everybody. I think the big challenge for us all is figuring out where and when is the right time to inject that public funding along with the private funding to have the biggest impact. The good news is everybody keeps coming together in rooms like this to try and figure out how do we all play our role to move everything forward. So it's a very exciting time.
Well, let me ask Lynn Orr, from the perspective of the DOE, how do you make a judgment as to when public funding should be injected into this process? Obviously, some of these companies are very in the early stages, some are much more advanced. How does that decision get made?
Well, here again, it's a portfolio for us. We invest on the research side. We invest on helping move technologies toward licensing, and then we also have kind of at the later stage the loan guarantee programs. And maybe I'll just take a moment and talk about those because we haven't quite got to that yet. The loan programs, they sit at the place where a technology is really, in our judgment, ready to enter the marketplace, but funders and project finance kinds of folks haven't seen enough of these before to get over the risk worries. We did this, for example, in utility scale solar, and actually moved to the point where we don't do that anymore because the normal financial mechanisms have taken up that process quite nicely. We provided just over $8 billion in loan guarantees for the Southern Company plants and the two AP1000s at Vogtle, and Steve might can give you much more detail there if you want it. And we were actually very happy to do that as a way to do just what I said. And in November, the department announced that it's supplementing its existing solicitation for projects in this area that will get us up to $12.5 billion in loan guarantees available to support innovative nuclear energy projects. So we're intending to try to contribute there as well.
Steve Kaczynski, we've now heard from the very kind of careful and deliberate way that DOE goes about thinking about financing these projects, and the crazy guys down at the other end. Ultimately, though, if we go from the venture stage through the germination stage, ultimately someone's going to have to buy these. And you run Southern Nuclear, and you've said on the first panel, and the reason you're sitting here is that you might be interested in buying some of these. How are you thinking about the potential for these and the market, at least the domestic market for these?
Well, as you know, and as you've heard, there's just tremendous change going on in the electric sector. And as a major utility, we continue to try to adapt to that. And it is going to require a different set of products to kind of meet, our ultimate goal of meeting our customers' needs. And so, as Simon said, we see opportunities in advanced reactors beyond just the electric sector that we think are a growth part of our business. So we face, Clean Power Plan. We know what's going on with coal. We know carbon capture and sequestration has some of its own hurdles that we're working through. But we clearly see, the cliff coming with both existing gas plants, coal plants, and nuclear plants that at some point are going to run short. And we are growing as an economy, obviously not as fast as we want to, and load growth is not at a 2% rate, but it is still going to require the replacement of and meeting additional needs. And so we just see this, and as Lynn has said, this is all about the full portfolio. That is what we have to concentrate on. We cannot over-leverage in one area, so we need all the options on the table. But I think very intriguing is the other types of energy products that could bore out of the advanced reactor technology. That's why we're participating in this as we are.
Carol?
As I worked for President Obama and shepherded the Vogtle loan guarantee through the White House side, and I want to thank the folks at DOE for all the work they did. I think there's a fairly significant public policy issue that is sort of embedded in this issue of federal loan guarantees, whether there are different programs. The solar was in one program, the nuclear is in another program. And that is, broadly speaking, what is the role of the federal government in terms of supporting new technologies? I actually am a big proponent of this, but it is not without its detractors. And there are various stories that make their way into common knowledge, which don't really reflect on the program, in my opinion, but nevertheless become sort of a poster child. And I think that in this particular industry, and it's great to see so many private players here today, it seems to me unlikely that we won't continue to need some form of a federal level backstop. And I think, figuring out how to make sure that can work in a way that also brings in the private sector, meets the needs of the developers and the operators would be a very important part of an early stakeholder conversation. We looked at three, when I was at the White House, we did look at three loan applications, three different sites. In the end, we only agreed to move forward with one, the other two for a variety of reasons. But not the least of which, when you look at how the loan guarantee program is structured, those were merchant plants, and our ability to say with a lot of confidence in a merchant market that a loan was going to be, quote, repaid was somewhat difficult. So I think there are some real. It's important for the federal government to be here. I think they can provide funding. We have a long history in this country of providing funding to nascent industries, but I'm not sure that the current structure is going to be the best to kind of get the response we need and really get the money out and the guarantees out in a timely manner.
Well, I want to have Lynn respond to that, but I think a little context is necessary, right? The loan guarantees that you were thinking about when you were in the White House were for $10 billion or on the.
Well, we ran two different programs,
Right.
right? Because the recovery, so you have the loan guarantee program that gets set up in the Bush energy bill, and then you have the Recovery Act, which sets up a separate loan guarantee program. Those were much smaller. And that's where a lot of the renewables sat. The nuclear stayed over in the original one, and there was money. Someone's going to. I think there was money to do at least 2, maybe 3. One ended up sort of getting through the process. But part of the issue is when the private sector lends money, right? They can kind of. I'm going to take a big chance here. I'm going to take a modest chance here. And as long as it all works out in the wash and I make money for my investors, everyone's happy. The federal government doesn't end up having quite that. You know, if you don't make money on one of them, you're kind of, you got a lot of questions to answer for. And, you know, the nature of loan guarantees and investing in nascent technologies should be that you're taking some risks, and that if at all, you know, that you're making progress, but it may be a little lumpy. That's very hard, I think, for agencies to withstand.
Indeed.
Yeah, I don't disagree. If you think about the way we have worked with companies on a whole variety of technologies, we kind of partition the space of cost sharing or loan guarantees in ways that the more risk there is, the earlier the stage of the technology development, the more we're likely to put into it. And then as we get to things that are really ready for, at least in our judgment, for the marketplace, then we take a smaller role and a different role. The modifications announced in November for our loan program it's still, I mean, these are projects where we really do expect to get paid back. We think they're at the stage where the technology is ready and that it needs a nudge to get there. But as I said, we do lots of earlier stage stuff as well. The new potential projects can involve things like advanced reactors, small modular reactors, uprates and upgrades at existing facilities and front-end nuclear facilities as well. And the project costs that can be included could be those that are incurred as part of the NRC licensing process for design certification or construction permits, construction operating licenses, those kinds of things. So we've tried to broaden the spectrum of places where we can contribute, because we recognize that the technology readiness is not the only issue in getting something to the point of operations.
Mark, you had a comment?
Not so much on loan guarantees, but since we got into the role of public investment in federal government, I just want to make the important point that the national labs are understanding that this is a really different kind of paradigm that we're dealing with, and the national labs need to be more nimble, more agile, and that's part of the GAIN initiative. But not only to help address early stage R&D questions that companies may have, but also provide demonstration platforms for perhaps first of a kind builds like NuScale, for example. So the labs themselves within the framework that we can operate in have more that we could do to adapt to this, and we're thinking about that very actively.
Can the crazy guy say something?
Please.
So there's a big difference between risk equity capital and loan guarantees. And if I understand that there are loan guarantees, I'm willing to take the risk if I know that when you start to talk about billions and billions of dollars, somebody who's independent and looks at the whole landscape will support us. And that's something to work towards. But Mark's point is really the critical thing. The one good thing that we've seen is that the national labs are changing their approach to all of this. And it's been one of my big beefs, and Leslie has gone through this, where if you want to use government property for anything, I mean, we were slowed up for a number of months in closing on Leslie's funding because we couldn't figure out how to reimburse MIT for government-owned accelerators. And that's very frustrating. That shouldn't happen. The amount of money we were talking about relative to things like what happened at Oak Ridge in World War II and all is peanuts. And I understand the sequesters, and I understand all that stuff, but that is the most short-sighted thing in the world. If I'm willing to risk capital on a technology that won't be there for 15 years, the thought that the federal government won't open up the lab is just incomprehensible to a citizen.
That is an excellent point, and it's one that we're going to explore a little bit more depth on the next panel. That's a perfect opening to it. Let me turn to Christian Garcia, who is a venture investor for a large family fund. Tell me how you think about these kinds of investments from your perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So, I mean, I think it does depend a lot on stage, right? So we've talked about commercialization capital, we've talked about early stage capital. I think on the early stage side, there's a framework of just looking at opportunity versus risk versus milestones, as was mentioned. So, on the opportunity side, all the challenges with nuclear, right? Whether it's safety, whether it's proliferation, whether it's waste. I mean, that is the opportunity set, because if you believe, as has been talked about, that baseload generation that's carbon zero is going to be of great demand, that is the opportunity to be solved. On the risk side, there are some challenges that are pretty unique to nuclear, which is why you don't see a lot of venture capital investment in this space, right? You've got very large capital requirements, very long lead times to get to market, a lot of regulatory concerns. These are things that don't foot well with a typical venture capital fund, which generally has a 10-year lifetime, right? And so you need patient capital, and you end up having to look at it from a milestone perspective. So at each funding round, what is the progress that's going to be made on the technology, on the engineering, on the regulatory? What is the value creation to get to that next milestone? And that's how you kind of get comfortable, because it's hard to, make a 30-year bet on something, but you can get into bite-sized chunks and make a 1-year, 2-year, or 5-year bet, and you kind of go down along that path. And I think if you believe in the end goal, you can get comfortable with that, but you have to have some patience on what that's going to take you, right?
Joe Lassiter, who's a senior fellow at Harvard Business School, let me ask you this. Guys like Christian and Art need to know that there's going to be a market
not leave us that the Oak Ridge MSRE is going through its first commercialization in Canada with terrestrial. It should not leave us that U.S.-based Thorcon Power is going through its first commercialization in Indonesia with an MOU in Indonesia. So we've got private capital backing new ideas who are sending us an incredibly clear message that though we may think we lead this race, the people are going to play the game on another field, in part because the demands on foreign governments for cheap power and clean power are remarkably higher than they are here in the United States. Remember, 1/3 of China's population does not have access to clean cooking fuels or clean heating fuels. If you look at what kills Chinese, it's indoor air pollution, not outdoor air pollution. You want to save lives in China, you build more coal plants. As you look at the economic slowdown that's going around the world right now, the reaction is going to be to build even more coal plants and defer the transition to renewables and nuclear. They're going to keep people mining to preserve local jobs. So I think we're in a race, but we're not. We're living under the impression very often that we are setting the pace. And the answer is they are setting the pace. They are the people without power. They are the people who are reinventing their regulatory frameworks. And we've got data on the table. And that data comes from TerraPower in China. It comes from Thorcon in Indonesia. It comes from terrestrial in Canada. And we should use the power of private capital to inform us to how rapidly we need to make these changes. I think everybody should leave here thinking that we need to speed up everything dramatically, or the carbon's going to be in the air while we're still talking about who should open the door for who and walk through correctly. The race is on.
Chris?
Yeah, thanks, Professor. So, I mean, on the TerraPower example, I think that's a good one for thinking through. As an investor, we've talked about the regulatory time frame and the challenges there. And so how do you get comfortable with that? Well, if you're looking at a company or technology that has a path, right, and say, hey, well, I've got a very secure public-private partnership with, in some cases, a foreign government that's going to help me, test this out, that's going to help me get to some sort of deployment. They're knocking, you're running out of excuses, right, to not put capital in. So that's, as you think about how companies can de-risk their path to commercialization, that's one of them, and unfortunately does have to happen sometimes outside of this country.
Art?
I'd just like to second that. Joe, frames it really, really well. I think it was mentioned that $1.6 billion has been raised. We don't talk about our balance sheet or anything like that, but we're a significant portion of that. So we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars. And if you've been involved, as I have, for 15 years, and you finally have proven the technology, and you face this uncertain U.S. environment, which is very complex because we're an advanced country and all kinds of competing agendas. And you look at India, you look at China, why would you take the additional risk of going through the regulatory process in the United States and the political quagmire if somebody showed up with a check for $2 billion to build a plant? It would be fiduciarily insane. And I don't think there's a soul in the United States who fully understands it. Joe does.
Yeah, the Indonesian guys in this MOU, it's interesting, and again, you should read all of these. They talk about demo plants in 2022 to 23. They talk about deploying tens of gigawatts by 2030. And that's because of the pressure that they're under. They've got people who badly need the power. They know they need to move their countries away from the incumbent industries and oligarchies that influence them. And they want levers to do it. And advanced nuclear in general has a tremendously powerful transformative force on the economies. So my only point here is I think private capital's role here is not only to bet on technologies, but to give the people in the United States alternative views of the regulatory possibilities and alternative data that can be collected sooner that might lead us to faster change. Because the race is on and we're losing it to coal. And the current economic slowdown is going to accelerate coal, not decelerate it. When people stimulate the Chinese economy, they're going to build more coal plants because they can. They'll run them at lower efficiency. They're going to keep people mining because they're going to keep them working. And they're going to defer the transition. And when you see people at Paris struggle between developing countries and developed countries, that's the struggle you see. And I look at all that and I say the likelihood we keep this under 1.5 degrees C is 1 over Avogadro's number, which is a little bitty number. And so we need to move fast, and we need to move fast on clean, we need to move fast on cheap, we need to move fast on secure. And thanks to private capital, we've got rounds in the chamber. I wish they were in the chamber in this country.
Joe, I was told there would be no math, so
Right.
and I have to admonish you. Let me ask Chris, because what we've heard, I think quite understandably from some of the investor community is, look, it's going to be really hard to do this in the United States, and the Chinese seem to really want to do it, so why don't we do it there? That's not the path that NuScale has followed. What has your experience been, and what lessons do you think that holds for people like Leslie and the other companies?
Yeah, so we've looked at all those markets, so we recognize that small modular reactors are going to have a global marketplace. Our objective is really to get this technology in as many places as possible, but we're starting in the U.S. And we started in the U.S. with an advanced light water reactor that we felt there was a path through. So, what people see here about the pathway to certainty, and as I mentioned, in our 25-year journey, 4 years of that is the construction, and 4 years of that is the licensing. That is not that hard, and that is known. So we see a very clear path for doing it, and we believe by being the first ones to go through it, we will have exercised the U.S. regulator and the U.S. markets to be thinking about advanced technologies that will make it easier for the advanced non-light water reactors going forward. And we have the most difficult. They talked about a 10-year horizon for a venture capital fund. Our primary investor is Fluor. They're measured quarterly. They're a public company. So they have to make the case as to why NuScale is a good investment, and they have done that successfully. We had a number of Fluor's analysts out back in August to come out and look at the technology, and they wrote very favorable reviews of, we understand why this makes sense. And you have to be able to answer that question to people, why what you're doing makes sense economically, and for us personally, that we think it also makes sense globally for what we're trying to do and bringing clean power to the rest of the world. But we have to beat coal and we have to beat gas because those are the competitors, and we can't believe for a second that what we do in the U.S. will naturally happen in the rest of the world. We need to do it competitively, we need to prove it here, and we need to lead the rest of the world.
Let me ask Steve Kaczynski, obviously you must be relatively bullish about the chances for Generation 4 reactors to make it through the U.S. regulatory process, because otherwise you can't use them. Talk about how you're thinking about those things.
Yeah, this is I'm just reflecting on that conversation. I think there's something that we all just need to stay aware of. There is a reason why the processes are in place at the NRC, and there is something special about nuclear, and you just always have to remember, a problem somewhere is a problem everywhere. So it may seem like an easier path, and hopefully not a shortcut. It just needs to be done with quality, and we can certainly work on our regulatory, modernize it to make sure it's kind of the gold standard and leads. And I think that's what we should go do. I do think there's tremendous value to that. I think we could take a major step backwards if a China or a Russia or an India or someone mismanaged the technology. And that's why I think NuScale is sticking to this course. Our view is, yes, it's all light water reactor founded, and we need to work collaboratively with the NRC to modernize that. But I don't think we should just accept that it's just too hard and we can't make progress. I think the leadership there at the NRC, I think it's a very good opportunity. I think if we come with one voice, we can make progress there, and I think we can examine things that have been built over decades and innovate kind of that regulatory process. But at the end of the day, we all want a strong, approved product that everybody knows is safe and it actually fulfills that mission. That's what we need for the long term.
I want to change gears very briefly, because one thing that we haven't touched on yet on this panel is the business case for existing reactors. Obviously, this is a cause for those of us who care deeply about preserving the existing fleet, this is kind of the core of the anxiety. I wonder if, Carol, you and Maria could talk a little bit about that and how you're thinking about, from the industry perspective, Maria, how are you thinking about making the business case for the existing fleet?
Yeah, I guess I'll start, Carol. Well, obviously the environment that we're operating in today, if you look at the merchant fleet with the very low gas prices and, low demand right now for electricity, it's sort of the perfect storm, if you will. And so I can say across the fleet, we are taking a hard look at ourselves to drive efficiency into the processes. So as Steve reflected from a regulatory perspective, that says, well, maybe they need to modernize. If you also look at our processes within our fleet, over many, many years, we've added here, added there, added here. And so we're taking a fresh look at some of the ways that we run our businesses to step back and say, could we do it more efficiently? And we're finding some opportunities. So there's market answers. There's also internal, I'll say, process efficiency answers that the industry is taking on very seriously. We started an initiative called Delivering on the Nuclear Promise, and that's advancing safety, advancing reliability, and becoming more efficient. So a lot of support for that, very promising effort. In addition, we do have to look at the markets. There's a lot that nuclear brings to the table that, quite frankly, we've just taken for granted, and we've talked about it in some of these panels recently. So when you say the fact that, hey, I'm running and producing electricity, and I don't require any fuel supply delivery, well, that's pretty darn attractive when you're in, say, a polar vortex, and maybe that gas supply can't get to you. Well, it's kind of attractive that you put all your fuel in that core for 18 or 24 months, and you're not waiting on that external delivery supply. We call that fuel firmness. That's something that's inherent to nuclear that doesn't get valued for nuclear. And so there's things like that. The fact that not only are we saying, it's there 7/24, it's there around the clock, it's also providing voltage support for that reliable electric grid that we all count on. So there's different attributes of nuclear. I think we need to give a hard look to that value that's always been there, but that has not actually been paid. For that form of electricity. And that's all before we get to the part that we talk about that it's carbon-free. So there's some real inherent positives for nuclear. And in the same way that you manage your own personal portfolio, why wouldn't we value fuel diversity? Great, gas is, low price today, get that there's a whole lot of it, right? Let's look through history. Have we gone through these cycles before? We absolutely have. Would be crazy to put all of our eggs in one basket. But if we leave the market to itself, that's exactly what we're going to do. Over the next 10 plus years, you're going to see a lot of build out in gas. Right? And then we're going to find if there is any issue in the gas market, it's going to ripple all the way through the electric sector. Why would we do that to ourselves? We're smarter than that. Right? We should, as a country, look at that and say fuel diversity only makes sense. That's why you have a diverse portfolio personally, right? It's the same concept.
So to that point, Carol, and as a point that Senator Murkowski raised, the things we think we know about energy can turn wrong very, very quickly. When you entered the White House this time, things were quite different than they are now. And that could change back. How do you think about that in terms of the existing fleet?
Well, I mean, if we had all been here, 5 years ago and said natural gas would be playing the role it plays today in energy generation, the audience would have laughed at us, right? I mean, so we don't know what we don't know, and I think that has been made abundantly clear. I think that So I agree with everyone who has said, we need a diverse portfolio. I particularly believe that we need to create more and more opportunities for renewables, for wind, for solar. I think the Congress and the President have done a good job in terms of extending the tax credits. I think that's important. With respect to the existing nuclear, the EPA has issued instructions to all states to craft clean power plant programs. There's a lot of confusion about this, but let me see if I can simplify it. While EPA used a formula to derive those target numbers, states are not required to follow that formula in developing their plan. They're free to do whatever they want. I mean, if they can get it all from efficiency, get the reductions, then they can go get it from efficiency. It seems highly unlikely to me, and I think to anyone who thinks about this, that at the very time states are crafting plans to reduce their carbon emissions, they're going to make the hole deeper by getting rid of a baseload carbon-free energy source. So it is now in the state's interest to help maintain that existing base load. And I think that EPA did make some changes in the final rule, which will allow states to work across state borders, which I think could be very helpful for the existing nuclear fleet. But I think that what's going to be important as we go forward is, one, these plans about reducing carbon emissions, and then secondly, to ensure that everything, and some other folks have mentioned this, I think Steve, you mentioned it, that the safety side of this and the relicensing side of this is also moving. But, the plans are due from the states. Someone's going to help me here. I think this summer, right, July something, August something, for the first draft. There was obviously litigation underway. EPA prevailed against a stay, so states now really do need to get to work. But I think that is an opportunity on a state-by-state basis to have a pretty important conversation about the benefits of an existing carbon-free baseload source of energy.
So, Tina, let me ask you this. Taking all of this together, how should we be thinking about the economics of nuclear going forward? You've heard about the existing fleet and the challenges it faces, but some of the opportunities too. We've heard about how the investor community is thinking about advanced reactors. How do you sum all of that up in terms of the business outlook for this industry?
Well, I think it's important that we think about this as a continuum, as Maria had indicated earlier. We're learning a lot right now with the existing fleet about how to operate those efficiently. At the same time, we're developing technologies that help us in that endeavor. I think what NuScale is doing is really a key bridge from here to the advanced nuclear technologies, in the Gen 4 space. And as NuScale is going through the design certification and as utilities are coming together to think about how they'll operate those reactors, we're doing some of the things that I think can lay the foundation to more quickly get to a better economically deployable Generation 4 fleet. There's, change thoughts about how do we make sure that as we build new technologies that have different safety cases for them, that we're taking advantage of those improvements and not just taking new technologies and operating them the same way with the same tools that we did in the past. So I think the key thing to really help that economic picture of the future is to wisely build on the things that we've learned with the existing fleet, make a step of improvement as we go through the process with the small modular reactors, and make sure that all of those learnings are available and can be leveraged by the advanced technology developers.
I want to end where we started with Leslie, and I want to ask you this. You now have the opportunity to speak to the policymaking community, not to mention the entire world watching this on the internet. What do you want policymakers to know about the kind of economic prospects for your company and your industry going forward? We're about to get in the next panel, what do you want them to do? But what do you want them to know about how you're doing from a business perspective?
Thank you so much. So the market opportunity here is tremendous for advanced reactors as a whole. We are basically figuring out newer and better ways of generating clean and scalable baseload carbon-free electricity. So the market opportunity is the electricity generation market very, very broadly. And I think that if we are able to find the right regulatory pathway for this technology, if we're able to broaden the existing regulatory system that does such a good job of licensing light water reactors, if we can broaden that to cover advanced reactors as well, we'll be able to take advantage of that whole suite of technology in the US, and then we can export it out to the rest of the world.
Thank you very much, Leslie. Thank you to this incredibly interesting panel. I would beg our audience to take a very short break and then come back for the next panel, the kind of culmination of all of this, which is what do we want you to do, the Washington policymaking community. But please join me in thanking this panel.
Thank you, Matt.